Manx Radio Podcasts, powered by Shore.
The Nation Station, Manx Radio.
Hello and welcome to the latest look back at Talking Heads. Popular topics this week included a planned public sector housing rent rise, the future of the Queen's Pier in Ramsey, and the amount of time dedicated to answering questions in the House of Keys. But we'll start with the island's response to the recent flooding. Here's Stu Peters.
Talking Heads, brought to you by Magic Carpets, with the only Carndine design showroom on the island.
Could more have been done to prevent the flooding which took place last week? The wettest December day on record led to many flooding problems around the island on Thursday. Is flooding inevitable? Would more staff have helped the island cope with the extreme weather? Or would that have made little difference given the amount of rainfall that the island experienced in a relatively short period of time? Most of the island flooding occurred on allegedly improved roads and came as a direct result of incompetence and negligence, says JF. The reason Mr Gorn gave for Pier Road not draining was the river was full. Well, there is a gate on the harbour holding all the water in, says Robbie. Yeah, I don't know what the position was of the flap gate. I mean, it sits quite low in the water, doesn't it? So you would imagine that if there's a big backlog, it would just go over the top of it anyway. But I believe, because I think somebody said on Friday that part of the problem was that the Pier Road, the river wasn't draining properly because it was high tide at the same time. I don't know. You reap what you sow. All these people who shout about the government's workforce being too big will just have to get on with the emergencies themselves, as the frontline services are not able to cope anymore. Routine maintenance is no longer being carried out in the same way it used to be. They're just window dressing, says Alan. I think most people don't have any problem at all with frontline troops. It's the amount of managers and supervisors that there are sitting in the offices and telling the few remaining frontline troops what to do. We've had extreme weather for hundreds of years. There's not much that you can do when it hits that hard. Remember, we're still coming out of the last ice age, says Dave. Stu, guess what? I've just seen the gully sucker on Pier Road, says Mike. Is that a euphemism? Mr Gorn made a statement saying that we could have put better drainage in Pier Road, but it would have cost money. A joke, says Pete. But I don't see the joke there. Maybe I'm missing something, Pete. Gorn and the DOI are responsible for the chaos of these last few days because they transferred ownership of roads to local authorities, but they didn't insist on them that they needed to purchase road sweepers, which many don't have. So that's why we have flooding, as the roads haven't been touched since April, especially in Ramsey. Okay. Brian says, hi Stu, about 25 years ago I was driving a wagon for a contractor when the Mountain Mile was being resurfaced. Beneath the road this is interesting, beneath the road were box drains like small tunnels which were slate lined and big enough for sheep to walk through. Unfortunately, the experts decreed that they were unnecessary and plastic drainage pipes were laid in them and the void around the pipes filled in with gravel. Within a few months, there were depressions across the road where the old drains were and you could tell where each one had been. The problem with the surface was rectified, but ever since then, the Mountain Mile has suffered landslips whenever we get heavy rain. The gabions, stone-filled cages, which are now retaining the bank in several places, were not there prior to this upgrade. For once, I have to agree with Bernard Moffat that maintenance work that used to be done by the local gangs is not carried out anymore. We're now paying the price. I trust that our newly formed Army Reserve Unit have already put in a requisition for a bridge for Laxey. That from Brian. Yes. Stu Bernard's right. There's a lack of local knowledge when it comes to maintenance. Walk past building sites and see blocked drains nearby. Nobody checks themselves, says Bill. Every year when a marshal for the TT and Manx, I clear the drains, which are always blocked. Wow. Stu, either I'm naive or stupid, but listening to Phil Gorn say that even with bigger drainage, the flooding would still occur owing to the river flooding over its banks. Is the DOI not responsible for the river, says Ali. Good point. I suppose they are, yeah. Yeah, but I mean, if you got high tide, if you got that sort of, confluence of different factors, I don't know whether or not it would make any difference, to be honest. I think a lot of it is to do with poor river management. They haven't been touched, cleaned, cleared for at least 30 years. All the silt, stone, branches, trees will have to build up and it's raising the height of the riverbeds, leaving stormwater nowhere to go. Interesting. When we were kids down Glen Willen, it'd break your legs if you jumped into the dry riverbed from the bank, but now you can just step into it in some places, says Alan. Right, okay, well, yeah, in that case, that kind of ties in with what our last contributor said, that the government ought to be doing more then, to be clearing out the rivers so that the water's got somewhere to go. Hey, boy, not often I agree with you, but you're correct. Too many people polishing chairs and not enough troops. Facts, says Frank. Oh, there's a first. Frank and I agree. Stu, perhaps Mr Gorn could give us an answer about the possibility of dredging the rivers, lowering the riverbeds to enable water to drain away. If Peel Road is going to be prone to more floods, surely for the sake of businesses in the area, Mr Gorn's department should make this a priority, says Mal. Hi Stu, well said Bernie. Where did budgets for local gangs used to come from? Country hedges, ditches and culverts are an important aspect of the island's historic landscape, whose neglect and sometimes destruction has a significant impact on the island's drainage. That from Paul. Problem with government departments is that they award contracts to the lowest tender, but during any works, no checks are carried out to ensure the contractor is employing skilled labour to do the works. Most contractors are tied down on prices, so can't afford to employ registered craftsmen, but will employ cowboys instead, and this is well-known fact in the construction industry, says Pat. Well, yeah, but I mean, if you're digging a ditch or something, you don't necessarily need skilled labour, do you? I don't know the construction job, but I don't know whether or not that's a valid point or not. Why don't they put Douglas Prom on a hold and use the 21 million to sort out the drainage, says Mike. Well, Mike, I think that's not a bad idea, to be honest. I blame Michael Fish, says Cliffy. Poor Michael Fish. You know, the trouble is that he must have given thousands and thousands of good weather forecasts, Michael Fish, and he's remembered just for that one where he got it wrong. It happens that in broadcasting, you know, we can do all sorts of marvellous things. You just get it wrong once and that's all that people remember. Where does all the road tax that we pay go? It goes into maintaining the roads, Nita. We've asked that question of politicians in the past. That and more goes into the road maintenance programme. So every penny that is earned from car tax and more goes into maintaining our roads or building new roads. Why did the river flow down the Peel Road? Answer, because the bridges at Quarterbridge and Pull Roads were blocked by debris. Trees, I was told. Interesting. Do you think that's something to do with it? Time the planning department took responsibility for the problems around Old Laxey. They've permitted far too much development above the area, leaving no green areas for rain to soak away. They need to review the Laxey plan and halt further development in this area. I've raised this objection in past planning applications, but just like the telecom mast issues, they appear uninterested, says Catherine. How many gangs are there now of 4 or 6 men in the DOI? They might just regret paying all the lads off, says somebody else. Half the problem is that the fish huggers in DEFA won't allow dredging of the rivers, and the tree huggers won't allow hedge trimming until September, by which time the verges have had a summer of growth, thus filling verges and ditches with thick, lush grass that blocks the flow of water. That from Shawnee. That makes sense, I have to say. I think it's time that we, the taxpayers, insisted on an independent consultation on each and every person employed within every government department. One huge loss each year is the Villa Marina and the acts that are booked there for the DED. Losses are huge. This is money that could well be used to better use, i.e. infrastructure. That from Brian. If you pay peanuts in the construction trade, all you're going to get is monkeys, says somebody else. And why doesn't the government withdraw the millions they've invested in the film studios and use it to buy a giant umbrella to protect the island from future heavy rainfalls, says Mel. I think that's a cracking idea. One huge umbrella. Let's go quickly to the lines and have a word with Helen.
Yes, I would just like to have a bit of positivity when it comes to the men who are working out in all the weathers and everything. Now, I had work done near my house last year.
Yeah.
It was all drains and things put on a back road. And the men that were here, they couldn't have done more for you, and they were so helpful.
Marvellous.
And also, when it comes, the people are talking about the water, what was said, they do need to speak to people who are maybe, the water that comes from the hills, I think, and other people, with the way the weather's been, and whether it be the weather circumstances or man-made, the water in some areas, it seems to be sort of flowing in, it's as if it's gone on the wrong way, if you understand me.
I see, yeah.
And like they say, they really need to listen to people who have been up higher on the hills, because years ago they used to it was automatically done that you cleared the culverts and things that they talk about.
Yes.
And but now, don't get me wrong, I think people still do, but there's a lot of people who don't.
Gotcha.
And also those men who are working, I will be corrected if I'm wrong. I think they have to have permission to go in if they see something from the landowners.
I'm not sure, to be honest, Helen, but that might be the case.
Also, I do feel, I don't think the men get enough credit.
No.
They're out in all these weathers, and it's all very easy for people to say, or give them a knock about something. But you do get people, and they work hard, and they worked, where I was, I couldn't praise them higher.
Wonderful. It's good to hear that side of the story. Thank you for your call, Helen.
The Nation Station, Manx Radio.
has work to regenerate its Douglas Town Centre been successful? It's been announced the Douglas Development Partnership is to close. In a statement, it says it's successfully advanced town centre regeneration in Douglas. Its town centre management role will continue in the council's Environment and Regeneration Department. Has the work carried out so far been a success, do you think? Has the island's capital improved over the past 15 years? Could more be done to improve the area? Tell us your thoughts. 15 years of broken promises, I'm afraid. Bus station, Villiers site, Summerland, Promenade, I could go on, says Alan. A lot of talking, not enough end product. It should have been mothballed years ago. I wonder how much of my rates the Corpy will waste on pie-in-the-sky schemes and hot air. These kind of jobs need culling, says somebody anonymously. Dave called, 15 years is a long time. If these people have been working for government all that time, will they get a pension? I expect. Promenade, the Summerland site, Lord Street site is still a mess. 15 years is a long time for nothing to happen. The work that's been done over that time included the Pier Road and NSC refurbishment, and they've been damaged by the flooding now. It's no wonder they're disbanding this. But over the past 15 years, what has it actually cost the taxpayers to have this? Time to demand large pay rise for working men and women to pay for this government's mismanagement. It's time to stand up to this not-for-purpose shower in government, says Trevor. Yeah, I don't know what that's quite to do with Douglas Town Centre, but OK. When the first part of the new pavement was going down outside my shop in Nelson Street, I questioned the decision to have it light grey. I obviously knew nothing, says Chris, 22, but the pavement now looks dirty with a big slick of oil, etc. going down it, so they bought a special machine to wash it and have tried various detergents, but to no avail. I was told that I was too negative by the DOI, but when it's your business that's being used as a guinea pig, I think you should have a say in it. Regards from Chris. Yeah, I agree with you, Chris, yeah. Absolutely, and a lot of people have said the same thing about, the fact that it doesn't look any better. And wasn't this special machine 150 grand or something for a glorified jet washer that doesn't work properly? Yeah, absolutely. I think that sometimes the authorities don't realise the impact that these improvements, he said, doing air quotes, have on businesses. I know that when Athol Street was being resurfaced, it seemed that it was taking weeks and weeks and weeks with no real regard for the people that are trying to work down there or run businesses. But I suppose that's the price of progress. I suppose that, there's got to be that kind of uncertainty while things are getting done, that kind of inconvenience. I can't recall any jobs in government being axed. The taxpayer is used as a vehicle to keep the bloated public sector in non-jobs. Fact, says somebody. OK. Stu, you've only got to look at North Quay, where all this regeneration started. Paving slabs at the side of the single one-way roads that branch off from the end of Ridgeway Street are cracked and broken because Phil Gorn allows it to be used as a car park in the evenings and Sundays. They were never laid to take the weight of vehicles, and although Mr Gorn has admitted this is an issue, he's failed to do anything about it. That's from Tracy. Right then. So what do we think generally? 15 years of Douglas Development Partnership. Has it done particularly any good work that you're aware of? I've cited the North Quay as a scheme that I think it looks good. You go down the North Quay in the evening and the blue sort of lighting, the stainless steel railings and things, I think it all looks very smart. The new road surface and the walkways and things, I think that's particularly good. But has there been anything else really over 15 years that has justified the cost of running Douglas Development Partnership? Text in here, it's this sort of talking shop that really annoys the public. Not enough results to justify the outlay. How many jobs could have physically been done for the cost of just talking about them? That question from John. Yeah, and I think that's a fair question, to be honest, John. We do seem to like data, don't we? I noticed that I think the Health Minister's got some money from the Seized Assets Fund to do more research into the scale of the drugs problem in the Isle of Man. Yet at the same time, government 3 years ago pulled the funding from Dash, which was actually dealing with the problem. And so, I do wonder sometimes whether or not we are all too keen on finding data and doing surveys and consultations and things like that, rather than just actually getting people who are prepared to roll the sleeves up and get the job done. So, yeah, I think you make a good point there. No mention that it would seem that Douglas ratepayers will now be paying the cost of this organisation. I'm glad that I live in Onken. Probably the final comment on the Douglas Development Partnership. Somebody called and said, I get an impression from this that Douglas Corpy has now got 2 event managers, which will be funded by the ratepayers. Well, I think Chris Pycroft was already funded by the Corpy. I'm not sure about Michelle O'Malley, whether or not that was a government position or it was a Douglas Council position or not. But they'll not have to be paying for premises anymore. Council, we think, we're funding both of those jobs, so it's not really much of a change, is it?
The Nation Station. Manx Radio.
Is a 2.6% rent increase for public sector housing tenants fair? Infrastructure Minister Phil Gaughan says limiting this year's public sector rent rises to inflation is a fair reflection of local authority views. The department, which approves rent hikes set by local authorities, says that this year's rents will go up by 2.6%. Mr Gaughan says the decision was taken after consulting all of the authorities involved, who'd all put forward their own suggestions. Is the increase fair, or could it put added strain on those on low incomes? Should public sector housing rents be frozen for the time being, or would you like to see an increase which is actually above inflation? A couple of comments. One from John. He said they need to get means testing sorted out first, or is that something else that Treasury needs yet more time to sort out? Yeah, apparently it is, and I agree with you. I don't have any problem at all with social housing, which people tell me is subsidised by the taxpayer. The truth of that, I'm not quite sure what the situation is, but I've got no problem at all with people getting cheap rents if they need it. But, I constantly hear on this programme that there are lots of people who don't need it and really are blocking homes that people who do need it could be moving into. People go on about rent rises, but what about rates, which are included in this, asks somebody else. We pay nearly 40 quid a week in rates, so knock that off the rent of a 3-bedroom house, so that puts the rent at about £70, with multi-occupancy and combined incomes in the high thousands each month. They're living the high life. Right then, okay. Increased rents above inflation, it's still cheap housing as all repairs, new kitchens are free. There are people in council houses with good paid jobs or even own their own businesses. Okay. Biggest complainers of the rise will be the ones with a new car on the drive, kids with quad bikes, 60-inch telly, house covered in Christmas lights, says Graham. Stereotype much? I bet the people I know who inherited a house and thousands of pounds who still live in a council house are rubbing their hands with glee over a little increase in rent. Whole system's rotten and needy people are not getting help while greedy people occupy housing they're not eligible for or entitled to. Yeah, that's my feeling about that. Now, whether or not this is actually the truth of the situation or is just a perception that a lot of us have, whether or not it's a big problem or there are only a handful of people abusing the system like that, I don't know. Because sometimes, we see these things, especially that do the rounds on social media about people abusing the system. And it turns out that you're only talking about 2 or 3 people. So it's not really the problem that it's made out to be sometimes. But if it is a significant problem, you're right, it needs to be sorted out. Means testing was promised. It's not happened. Let's crack on. Hey, boy, this just brings up the subject of means testing. Yes, it also raises the facts of those who own and rent out property whilst in commissioners' houses, along with those who run businesses from them, says Frank. Will this rise apply to MHKs who lived in subsidised housing? I don't know, I expect so. Rob Collister, Onken Commissioners called and asked Mr Gaughan to say publicly which local authorities asked for an increase of above 2.6%. Douglas, Ramsey and Onken all asked for a zero rise, so it's not them. The only one I think would have asked for an increase of more than 2.6% would be his own housing division, because they're trying to reduce the deficiency to government. To let people know, rent for a 4-bedroom house is £125, 3-bed is 110, 2-bed is 95 and 1-bed is 70. It's still very good. Well, it is really, but let's not forget that 98% of people in public sector housing are the lowest paid and the most vulnerable. Sooner that means testing comes in, the better. Good. Thank you, Rob. Let's go to the lines, see what Harry makes of it. Hello, Harry.
The thing that bothers me about it is that I know for a fact there's a load of government workers that are in council houses, and these are like departmental managers and different things, and that is wrong.
It is wrong.
It needs a means testing done, because there's too many people in housing that don't need it.
Yeah.
They could go out like everybody else and get a mortgage, or they shouldn't be in these places. I mean, the sooner they means test these people, the better. Because
well, it's irritating because this administration promised that they were going to do that. They were going to introduce means testing, and it's it was too hard, or it was going to take too long, or whatever. So it's been kicked out for the time being.
Well, I don't know. They really need to do a means test sooner rather than later, because there's too many people living in these houses that they can afford, but they don't have to do it. They can get the mortgage like everybody else.
Get a mortgage or rent privately and release that home for somebody who really needs it. Yeah. And
I know for a fact with I'm not going to go into personal details, but I know for a fact for children that are in care, that when they're coming out of care and they can't get anywhere to live, and these people should be looked at. That they can afford these places, but
sure.
Whereas the other ones, the managers, they're laughing,
Yep, sooner the better that means testing's brought in, I think. But whether or not it's going to happen soon or not, I don't know. Thank you, Harry. Another comment. Hi, Stu. I've been in my council house for 5 years, and in that time my rent's gone up by 48% without this coming April's rise. I've only had one pay rise in that same period, so there's over £1,000 extra coming out of my wages every year straight to the housing. Are they ever going to means test people? Well, you see, there's somebody from the other side of it. You know, it's very easy, I suppose, for those of us who've either got mortgages or rent privately to say, yeah, they ought to do means testing. There's somebody who actually says, yeah, they ought to do means testing. And I'm one of the people who thinks that should happen because, you know, if they looked at the means of people, their ability to pay for things like that, then maybe to shake the system up. I think, yeah, definitely the sooner that's brought in, the better. Afternoon, Stu, you say that you have no problem with social housing tenants getting cheap rents just because private rents are extortionate and kept artificially high doesn't make social housing rents cheap. They're fair. It's private owners who are whinging because they were daft enough to buy extortionately priced houses and now expect others to pay over the odds as well. It's just jealousy because they got scammed. Well, I say tough. Couldn't means testing be done via income tax returns? Asked Charles. You would have thought so. Stu, as a homeowner with a mortgage, my tax allowance dropped from 20% to 10% a few years ago. If we're being penalised further for trying to own our properties, then yes, council house tenants need to suffer too. There are too many of them living like kings, could easily afford to have a mortgage. Perhaps letting them buy their council house at the going house price rate and use that money to build new council homes. I'm sure if they were to be offered the chance to buy their council house, they'd much rather buy a place away from a council estate, though. As Dictator Bell says, we're all in this together. I don't think that man lives in the real world, though. That from Jody. As a local authority tenant of many years, I would readily agree to be means tested for myself and other tenants. Perhaps then people who are in local authority housing will cease to be stigmatised and accused of being scroungers, says Pam. Very good point, Pam. Thank you. Public sector housing rents are real world. Private rents are supply and demand. Yes, I think you're probably right. Comment from Bob about housing. My portion of rent and rates is somewhere between 45 and 50% of my pension. In England, 25% is considered a fair proportion. But here it's nearly 50%. That's before high electricity and gas bills. They don't take into account if somebody's living on their own. It costs the same energy to heat a room or cook a meal for one as it does for two, and that's not taken into account. No, it's not, Bob. I'm with you on this. Means testing needs to be brought in to make it fair, but that's another thing the government has promised and not delivered. Yeah, I'm with you. Bob for President.
Talking Heads, brought to you by Magic Carpets, with the only Carndine design showroom on the island.
You're listening to the latest Talking Heads podcast featuring highlights from the programme over the past week.
The Nation Station, Manx Radio.
Should there be restrictions on the number of questions that can be asked in the House of Keys and Tynwald? A backbench MHK has defended the number of questions he asks. Peter Carron yesterday asked for the 11 questions he had down in the Keys to be answered in writing, in protest over comments made by the Speaker of the House of Keys. But Onken MHK Peter Carron took exception to what the Speaker had to say and asked for his questions to be answered in writing instead. Should members be free to ask as many questions as they want, or could numerous detailed questions pose too much of a burden on departmental resources? Should more time be taken to answer the questions each week, or should tighter restrictions be considered? Stu, there's something wrong with the Isle of Man government if they're trying to silence elected representatives asking questions. This from Percy. What's the problem? Surely it's the job of publicly elected representatives to ask questions to get to the bottom of issues. Why all the secrecy? Mr Bell constantly bleating on about openness and transparency, yet you have MHKs refusing to answer questions. Is it not the problem that there is no transparency, and that is why so many questions are being asked in the first place? Don't shoot the messenger. Mr Carron is just trying to get to the bottom of things. Mr Tier blamed being asked so many questions on the fact that he'd not got the time to bring in the rate review. Rubbish. He doesn't answer questions anyhow. It's the job of his huge team of backroom overpaid civil servants. The reason MHKs don't answer questions in the House is that none of them are up to speed on the current situation and are frankly not capable of answering the questions posed. They've taken bits of departments out, swapped in other bits, basically cut off any paper trails in their departments, so it's becoming impossible to follow what was spent where and by whom, and all this before any Freedom of Information Bill comes into being. Time for change, time for transparent government, time for ducking and dodging the issues to stop, says Percy. Do you agree with him? Stu, democracy allows the freedom of speech, and that includes MHKs, who should be allowed to ask as much as they like. The issue is the quality, not the quantity. Simple answer is to do what we all do, is ask the question, answer it in the quickest time possible, says Richard. Okay. Speaker was just trying to get back to his second job as a chemist, says somebody else, hopefully tongue-in-cheek. Very rarely do I agree with Mr. Karen, but on this occasion he's right. Ministers should stop hiding behind the excuse of wasting their department's time and get on with their jobs, which, believe it or not, involves being answerable to the decisions they and their departments make. We supposedly live in a democracy, not a banana republic. Get on with the answers and stop moaning, ministers. And Mr. Speaker, such a stickler for protocol, should butt out and get on with it, says Alan. OK. Why don't you come off the fence, Alan? Stu, I don't believe there should be a limit on the amount of questions asked by an MHK at Keys or Tynwald, and I take great exception to the Speaker attempting to gag MHKs to stop information coming into the public domain, says Pete. Stu, regarding the questions debacle in the House of Keys yesterday and busy civil servants, maybe it's simply a case that the Isle of Man is just too small to run its own government. Ooh. Perhaps it's time that the Isle of Man became a county of England and we were administered from Westminster, says Albert. In brackets, seriously. Albert, seriously? Seriously? You'd like to see us as Merseyside East? Oh, perish the thought, surely. Waffle, waffle, answered by more waffle. That's politics for you. Totally agree with Peter Karen. Oh, sorry, there was another totally. Government needs to do what it keeps telling us, the ordinary general public, to work harder and be more efficient. They're running scared and want to stifle the voice with blame culture, that being no time or no resource to stand account to the public, their employers. Okay. To restrict questions is nothing less than an affront to parliamentary democracy. The Isle of Man has no effective parliamentary opposition in the same way that other jurisdictions enjoy, because almost all of our parliament make up the executive. True. This makes it even more important that the backbenchers who we do have are allowed to attempt to hold government to account. Also true. It's crucial to our democracy when an MHK asks a question, they do so on behalf of and with a mandate from the people, and the people deserve answers to those questions. Let's go to the lines and talk to Jill about it. Hello, Jill.
Well, I think they should be allowed to ask questions, but earlier on this year we went through quite a session, or a season even, of questions just being tweaked slightly, week after week after week on the same topic.
Yeah.
And
But I think that usually happens because the MHK asking the questions isn't getting to the actual facts that they want. You know, they be given answers that don't address the questions properly.
Well, it could be that they don't, ask the right questions.
Maybe, yeah. Oh, I'm sure there's an art form involved in asking the right questions, yeah.
But, I listen to it most weeks. And one day I'm going to put sellotape across my mouth and actually go and sit up in the public gallery.
Good for you, yeah.
We definitely don't want party politics. They should continue working for the electorate, not for the party.
Right. And I mean, would you like to modify the system then? So maybe a limit to the number of questions each MHK can ask, or a limit to the time taken for answers, or?
Well, I think maybe a limit to the number of supplementaries.
Okay.
If they're coming from the same MHK as asked the question.
Yes.
Or their comrades,
But again, like I say, I'm sure that there is an art form to this, and I'm sure that new MHKs spend quite a while learning what that art form is. That, you ask, it's a sprat to catch a mackerel sometimes, isn't it? So you ask the question, and that kind of opens the door to some sort of a debate, and then it's the supplementaries that have actually got the meat of the question in it.
Well, yes, I know they do it that way, but... Yes, I just think it's sort of a little bit of thought on all sides.
Yeah.
And where they can find out the answers, finding it and not wasting public time, sort of public air time anyway. Because, yes, we want to know what the government are doing, but we don't want it wrapped up in always as they do it.
Right, OK, good points. Thank you very much for your call, Jill. Some more texts and emails. Least he asked questions, unlike most of the half-wits in there. Now, there's some full wits in there. I think it's the case that the reason for so many questions from Peter Karen in the House of Keys this week was because some of the questions were carried over from the previous week when he was ill. Might well be true, Albert, yeah. Tell your man who said that we should be another county, there's a boat in the morning. That's from John Dog. Well, I kind of let him know how I felt about it, John. I wasn't quite as brutal about it as that. Afternoon, Stu. Mr. Karen, Mrs. Beecroft, Mr. Thomas, etc. should be allowed to ask as many questions as they like, and they should all be answered verbally in Tynwald or the House of Keys. They paid a handsome wage to do a job, do it. In years to come, Mr. Karen and others will be proved right on a lot of issues when the details and truth finally get revealed. Ask yourself this: why are they afraid of answering and full transparency? Don't forget the minister only reads out the answers. Somebody else has to trawl through hours of work to write these answers, taking up valuable time. Well, I think that's the issue, isn't it? Quite often repeating old things. I think it needs limiting. Bob says, of course they should ask questions and they should get answers no matter how long it takes. They should sit for as long as it takes to answer all the questions. Yeah, I think I probably subscribe to that. And all answers should be made public in the papers and especially on Manx Radio. Well, we broadcast it so you can hear it live, can't you? Without it being covered, think about all the scandals the public wouldn't have heard about if it wasn't made public. One question I've never heard answered is, why can't the utilities provide the gas they bring it in? It's just as well we've got Manx Radio in the papers, or the public would be lost with everything that's going on. Good. Just because you ask questions doesn't make you a good MHK, says Dave. Right. If you limit the amount of times you can ask the same questions in Tynwald, if the minister dodges the question, as all politicians do, we'll never get the real answer, says Cliffy. Well, that's my sort of thought about supplementaries and coming back with the same question. If you're not getting the answers, then, yeah.
The Nation Station, Manx Radio.
Could a refurbishment of the Queen's Pier be of benefit to the whole of the island, or is it just a Ramsey thing? The Friends of Queen's Pier are holding their annual general meeting at Ramsey Town Hall tonight. The meeting will be addressed by the man leading another group which has ambitious plans to restore the Victorian structure. The Queen's Pier Restoration Fund emerged earlier this year and has been in talks with the government over its plans. Would the pier be an asset to the whole of the island if it was restored, or is it of little interest to most people? Would you support the project, or is it time for the structure to be done away with altogether? Is there enough actual proposed use for it, or would it just be a well-maintained white elephant? We've got our first caller on today, and it's our friend John. Hello, John.
I just caught the end of somebody mentioning about cruise liners and all possibly coming to the Queen's Pier.
Yes.
Now, I think everybody in Ramsey knows that there's just not enough water there. When the ships, like, for instance, the Manxman, used to come to the Queen's Pier, if they came at low tide, I've known them to have to sit there for a quarter of an hour because they were touching bottom.
Yeah.
And they'd have to wait until the tide came in a little bit before they could move off.
And the Manxman wasn't huge either, was it, compared to these cruise liners?
No, I mean, I don't know whether even the new roll-on, roll-off ferries would have enough water there. But also, you'd never get cruise liners to come inside the Bahama Bank, which runs, I'm not sure how far out now, maybe 2-3 miles. But at low tide there, for instance, I believe if you stepped off, you'd only be up to your waist in the water on the Bahama Bank. So
yes.
No cruise. I mean, you don't, even when you get cruise liners in Douglas Bay, and even if they're going north, they do not go up through Ramsey Bay. They go south, round the Carpet Man, and then up, because there's just not enough water.
Gotcha. Yeah, well, that was my understanding, so it's good that you've confirmed that, because I'm sure that's been said in the past.
Oh, yeah. I mean, anybody in Ramsey would tell you the same thing. There's just not enough water.
Good stuff. Thank you for that, John.
Okay.
Cheers. Bye-bye. Good. That clears that up then. We've got Wilf on from Ramsey. Hello, Wilf.
Your man that's just been on talking about cruise liners.
Yeah.
Well, you can forget them anyway. And what you can forget is any boat ever landing on the Queen's Pier.
Well, that's kind of what John said, yeah.
Mr. Bell has been on in the past, years ago, saying that I can tell you that no boat will ever land on the pier again. The steam packet, when they finished with it, they took away both landing stages.
Right.
And all the steps, so that nobody could ever land on the pier.
Right.
I got one set of steps left because I represented the commissioners going to the meetings in the wedding cake at the sea terminal, and I never heard such rubbish in my life. But anyway, Mr. Brew was in charge then, and he said that all the steps had to be taken away. Now, and then they were quoting health and safe same time. and I said, you have to leave one set of steps, because if somebody's out there in a boat and they get in trouble or whatever, they can't even land on the pier unless there's one set left. So they had to leave a set there on the inside corner of the pier. If anybody on a sailboat, small boat, whatever, got in trouble, they could get onto them steps.
Yeah.
But they made damn sure that nobody was ever going to get up on the pier through them steps. They put them nasty spiked railings on the halfway up, so...
I suppose if the will was there, though, Wilf, then surely they could rebuild the steps, couldn't they, and refit them?
Well, apparently the steps are all supposed to be kept in storage down a quarry down south somewhere.
Oh, right.
When we asked Mr. Gorn what quarry, he didn't know what quarry they were kept in, but so I don't know about that. I think they're probably gone for scrap years ago.
Right.
Okay. But the thing is, they can be put back, but you see, there's no need for steps on the end anymore because there's no end. There's no piece pointing towards the point of air. There were steps all the way down there, you see, all on both sides.
Yeah.
Now, that was taken away completely so that no boats belonged to the steam packet or anybody else. When the steam packet was finished with the pier was finished, and the government systematically destroyed it piece by piece.
Gotcha. Okay, Will, thank you very much for that. Bit of insider knowledge on that. Let's have a word with Howard. Hello, Howard.
Hi, Stu. It's just, Wilf is, I'll reiterate what he was saying there. The pier head, it was a T-section on the end, and it was fairly substantial. And vessels, again, the steam packet were coming in from Belfast or even Ardrossan would come down through. Okay. It wasn't a popular halt with the skippers because it was an awkward place to get in and out of.
Yeah.
But he's quite right in what he said, that there was a deliberate act to take that head off. So the pier then became virtually unusable.
Ah, right.
And it was only the agitation of the likes of Michael Tramontano and a few others that actually kept it in where it is. Otherwise, it would have been gradually taken away.
Whole thing would have gone. Right,
well, this is what they were hoping. That they were hoping against hope it would have deteriorated to the point where they either had to take it down or it would fall down.
Yeah.
But the Victorians, in their wisdom, they knew how to build things. And
they certainly did.
It's outwit about 3 sets of government.
Yeah, that's true. All right, Howard, thank you for that. John Dogg's on. Hello, John.
I suppose everything I was going to say has been said. Wilf had lots of good stuff, and Howard. All I was going to say, there was a fella on earlier on in the day, excuse me, saying that, what's the point of walking out there? There's no cafe or nothing. That's what a blinkered attitude that is. You walk out because it's there. You don't walk anywhere because it's, you need to get to somewhere.
Right, okay.
I was blessed with the fact that I grew up, I fished off it. I spent time on it. I didn't actually live in Ramsey, but I was able to go out on it, and it's a fantastic, facility. I don't know if there's any fish in the bay now to go out fishing on it, but I'm all for doing anything they can to maintain it.
All right, good stuff. Thank you, John. Other comments. Bob called it. Of course it should be done. It's looked after itself in the past, however many years, with no restorations. So if they do something now, it could preserve it for another 100 years. And in terms of its use, the Manx boats used to berth at the end. I think they took away the berthing point. That could be replaced. Then the boats could come into Ramsey rather than Douglas. And maybe the ferries travelling to Belfast could stop off there to create a rival for the steam packet. Right then.
Talking Heads, brought to you by Magic Carpets, with the only Carndine design showroom on the island.
That's it for the latest look back at Talking Heads. Our thanks as ever to everyone who contributed to the programme. If you'd like to get involved in the discussion yourself, you can call, text or email between midday and 2 p.m. on weekdays. Or you can share your thoughts at any time on the Facebook page. That's Talking Heads with Stu Peters. You can listen back to each day's programme in full using the on-demand section of manxradio.com. And the website's also where you'll find an update of what's being discussed on the programme each day. You can also keep up to date with that information by liking the Facebook page or following Stu Manx on Twitter. And if there's anything you think we should be discussing on the programme, let us know by emailing talk@manxradio.com, and you can do that anytime. But that's it for now, so until next time, goodbye.
Don't sit in the slow lane. Join the fast lane right now with Shaw's all-new Superfast Plus broadband. Enjoy more bandwidth, amazing speeds and the best value on the island from just £23.95 per month. So don't be left behind. Get a piece of the high-speed action with Superfast Plus broadband from Shaw. For details, visit our stores in Douglas, Ramsey and Port Erin or click shaw.com.
Love being Shaw.
Terms and conditions apply.